Hi all, my name is Alessia and I'm a leadership and high performance coach. And you might actually be thinking, what is coaching? A lot of people actually aren't familiar with the field of coaching and exactly what it is, how it works, and why it exists. So today you're going to find out what is coaching exactly and how does it work? So first of all, we need to define coaching. There's actually quite a few definitions in the world of coaching, and coaching actually is a fairly new field. It is growing at a really high rate, but it is not agreed upon exactly what is the actual definition of coaching, and different coaches and different people in the field will have different perspectives on what coaching is. But I'm going to provide you with a definition that I like. This comes from Hae-Sun Moon, who is a scientist that studies coaching. The definition I want to share with you, it goes as follows. Coaching is a dialogue and a relational-based approach to curate clients' preferred interactions by exploring what might be wanted and identifying existing progress in that direction. So coaching, as you can tell, is really based on the future. That is one of the contrasting factors between coaching and traditional therapy, is that traditional therapy does tend to be somewhat past focused. We all know that kind of stereotypical situation in which somebody walks into the therapist's office and the therapist asks them, like, how was your childhood? What is your relationship with your mother, etc. Coaching is a little different. It focuses on the future. It focuses on your dreams, on your goals, on the things you want to achieve. It is not so much laden by the past. So one of the biggest confusions, I think, is the distinction between coaching and therapy and how they actually fit together, and which one should be used when, and should they both be used at the same time, and who does therapy serve and who does coaching serve. So I'm going to really lay out what the differences are and kind of the best served populations of each discipline. So I do want to say that this perspective that I have on coaching is based on my background in psychology, and I am a coach who has a background in psychology. And the perspective I share with you here and what I think coaching is really speaks to coaches such as myself or coaches with similar backgrounds. So not all coaches are going to be the same. Various other coaches will have different backgrounds and probably different opinions and methodologies. So just take that with a grain of salt and remember that this is my perspective and it really only applies to myself and coaches with similar psychological backgrounds. So I really want to start with the idea that disease is a spectrum. So a lot of people think that, say, depression, that you can actually just be depressed or not be depressed. But the thing is that a lot of our surveys and inventories for depression exist on a scale. So you can be extremely depressed or you can have mild depression, something that sometimes is called high functioning depression. So if we look at it this way, you can actually have a spectrum of people. So over here, you might have the normal population. And in psychology, we call the normal population anyone that doesn't have a clinical disorder that you can actually diagnose with a survey or some other methodology. So if we have the normal population over here, it actually is a gradient all the way to clinical depression. And there is an arbitrary cutoff point between the normal population and clinical depression. And that cutoff point can be very much a gray area. So there can actually be people that feel quite poor during their days, during their lives. There can actually be people who feel somewhat depressed, somewhat sad throughout their lives, but they don't actually qualify as clinically depressed. This population of people that aren't really living quite optimally, but also do not qualify in the clinical population, I think are really underserved. And back in grad school, one of my clinical psychology professors actually said that he thought that the population that has very mild depression actually might suffer the most because they are the ones that typically go untreated. If someone has severe depression, they typically do have treatment or seek treatment, and they tend to improve with treatment. But if someone has high functioning mild depression, they can go out through their entire lives and just kind of feel a little bit down all the time. And it's just that little bit that really gets you, because it's throughout a very long period of time that you just don't feel at your best. And I think a lot of people can identify with this, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, whether it's just feeling stressed, whether it's working at a job that you don't quite like, your psychological needs aren't being met, whether it's connection. There's all these little things that add up to creating a life that isn't quite as full and as fulfilling as one might want, or that people really deserve. So I think this is a really beautiful thing that's coming out of psychology, and this is the human potential movement, the positive psychology space, is that psychology is really starting to really focus on people that are normal and bringing them to the optimal. So historically, psychology typically focused on disease, on mental illness. So most of psychology until fairly recently was really just studying people that were suffering significantly. So whether that's, depression, suicide, schizophrenia, things like that, really the outliers in mental health. But now, in the past few decades, we've had this movement in which we realize that we can take psychology and use it to make the normal population function at a much happier, healthier, more fulfilled level than we ever thought before, which is a really amazing thing. And I think that everyone should have this experience of not just kind of going through life, not just going through kind of that survival mode, but actually thriving and really living at the full potential. And so that's really what coaching is about. And that is really taking someone in the normal population and helping them thrive, helping them achieve their dreams, achieve their goals, really having their psychological needs fulfilled. And one of the biggest differences between traditional therapy and coaching is that coaching does not need to identify someone with a mental disorder. Coaching assumes that someone is in the normal population, and actually coaches only work with people in the normal population. In therapy, if you go to a therapist, a psychologist, etc., they actually need to identify you as having a certain mental disorder. And this is actually for insurance purposes. So a lot of people don't know this. If you go to a therapist or a psychologist that takes insurance, they actually need to fill out the insurance form based on a certain DSM disorder. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This is really the book that all of psychology goes along with. I know Europe has a different model, but here in America, this is the manual for all mental disorders, and this is kind of what all of psychiatry and psychology agrees upon as how to classify certain mental disorders, how to identify them, how to treat them, etc. The thing about the DSM is that it is very stringent in its categorization, and one of the things that it really focuses on is that all diseases need to really kind of be identified as really inhibiting an individual in their day-to-day functioning. So what that means is that typically a mental disorder needs to really disrupt the quality of life of an individual. And so now you can imagine that if someone has very, very mild depression or just has some depressive symptoms but doesn't qualify as clinical depression, they can still be suffering without being able to be diagnosed as someone with depression. Someone could have some episodes of anxiety, but maybe they don't have enough to be diagnosed as someone with general anxiety disorder. And so, like I was mentioning before, in order to be treated by a psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist that takes insurance, that clinician will need to actually diagnose a particular mental disorder and put it into the insurance form. The thing is, it doesn't have to be a very kind of severe disorder. A lot of practitioners will write something like general anxiety disorder or adjustment disorder, which could really apply to a lot of people, and they're not very kind of severe disorders. But it does come to the idea that it really drives to the foundation of the model in psychology that in order to seek treatment, one needs to be sick. I think this is one of the things that coaching is really trying to alleviate and to really find a path forward for people that don't want to, don't identify with, or just don't think that it's correct to have to be diagnosed or have to identify as someone with a particular mental disorder to seek a way to improve their mental health. Because as we know, mental health is a spectrum. And just because you are not all the way over here in kind of that super depressed category does not mean that you can't benefit. And so I know that a lot of people think coaching is very separate from psychology, but I do actually feel that coaching is more of a subset in psychology, and it is kind of like when a field innovates. A lot of you know that in maybe your particular field, when something is innovative, there is a new model of doing things. And I think that really is what coaching is. It's a new way of working with the normal population that utilizes the principles of positive psychology and motivational interviewing, solutions-focused therapy to help people feel their best, to help them achieve the lives that they want to achieve. So now you might actually be thinking, okay, I kind of understand what coaching is, but does it work? Like, is there actually any science? There's actually a lot of science proving the efficacy of coaching. And I'm going to link quite a few of those articles below. So if you want to check them out, I would really encourage you to do so. There's neuroscience studies, there's controlled studies, there's all kinds of different protocols that have been studied, and they've been shown to be very effective. There's been studies on leaders, studies on the normal population, studies for health coaching. Diabetes is a very well-studied group of individuals in coaching. And so feel free to look at those below. I won't bore you too much on the details, but it is actually the field of research on the efficacy of coaching is growing, and it actually is fairly substantial now. I want to actually talk about a more interesting question is, how does coaching work? It's like people just, talk to each other and then things happen, like someone just figures out their lives, like they get good at achieving their goals? Like, is that how it works? Well, so it's a little bit more complex than that. I think that coaching actually works on two different modalities. One reason I think coaching is so effective is because it typically focuses on a solutions-focused approach. And this is often a very different way for us to think. A lot of times we are asked the question kind of, what's wrong? Like, what's the problem? Like, we often talk a lot about problems. And I just made a video about this on how we kind of focus on the things that are making us anxious or what is going wrong, and how that actually might not be the best strategy in improving our lives or improving our mental health. So I'll link that here. In this solutions-focused approach, a coach will typically guide the client into seeing the solutions that they already know exist to their current problems, to their current kind of blocks against their goals, and really help the client see the things that they already know. One aspect of coaching is that typically we believe the client actually has all the information and all the solutions that they need already within them. And really the client is kind of the expert here, and we are just here to facilitate the seeing of this knowledge and seeing of this path forward. And as the client sees the solution-focused approach through coaching questions, it actually really shapes their brain in a very particular way. So the region of the brain that I think is involved in this whole process is the reticular activating system. And this is actually the system that's involved in what we call the red car syndrome. So we know that when somebody goes and purchases a red car, or whatever car you might have purchased in a dealership, you all of a sudden start seeing that car everywhere. And you're just like, wow, I had no idea that there were so many red cars out there. But now that I own a red car, I can see them everywhere. And that is because you have kind of assigned meaning and value to that red car in your brain, and now you're able to pick up on it more. Solutions-focused coaching works in a similar way, I think, is that once we actually spend more time thinking, talking, and noticing solutions, that reticular activating system is engaged in our brain to see solutions everywhere. It's kind of like when I ask you the question, why did you have a bad day today? So if I ask you why you had a bad day today, you're going to think of all kinds of reasons why you had a bad day. And then your brain's going to start noticing all of those little things that really upset you. But if I asked you, why did you have a great day today? Then you're going to start seeing all of the reasons why you had a great day. And then you're going to start picking up on those. And because of the magic of neuroplasticity, this can actually be trained. So once we get good at seeing the solutions, we actually will have that as more of an automatic process than seeing the problems. And I'm sure you can imagine what an asset and what a value to kind of life that is in creating a mindset that see solutions over seeing problems. The second mechanism, which really allows coaching to have really substantial results, is something from the education space, and that is actually called active recall. If you know anything about coaching, you know that coaches love questions. One of the foundations of coaching is that it's very much based on a question approach and asking very targeted and very specific questions to the client. And when we ask questions, it typically allows the client to sit in the space and really think about solutions or think about answers to these particular questions. So you might wonder, why is that important? Why would it be important that someone sits there for an hour and asks me certain questions? Well, the reason that it's important is because we know that active recall, which is the process of remembering information by retrieving it from our own brains, actually is the best way for our brain to learn and to retain information. So again, we're speaking a little bit to neuroplasticity here, but if we're able to learn a new mindset, a new way of thinking, a more effective way of thinking, then active recall is one of the best paths and one of the shortest paths forward to doing so. So when you're sitting there and a coach asks you, I know you don't have a solution to this problem, but what if you did? What would that look like? What would a solution look like if you just had to kind of brainstorm one? Your brain starts engaging in retrieving information which would allow you to solve this problem. And so again, it's kind of similar to the solution-focused approach, but here in utilizing active recall, we're actually learning how to solve a problem and how to retrieve that information. And that will actually help you in the future through kind of neuroplasticity in how the brain changes if we sit there and practice recalling solutions-focused questions. So as we sit there and really answer a lot of solutions-focused questions, our brain is learning to do this active recall process in learning how to create solutions, which is so amazing. And really, it's kind of, you're essentially training your brain in that hour that you're sitting with your coach to create a different type of thinking and a different way of almost having your brain structured, which is an amazing thing. Okay, so I hope that this was helpful in addressing any questions you might have about coaching or kind of how it works. And any coaches out there, I would love for you to weigh in on this and let me know what you think. If you haven't done so, please subscribe to the channel. I have videos every Monday, and if you like this type of content, I would love to have you in the community. And I actually have a newsletter that I put out every Monday as well called Monday Motivation. I will link that in the description below. I hope you all have a wonderful week.